So, hi everyone, welcome to community meeting number 6 for the commercial locational criteria study. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here with us this evening. My name is Melissa Leinhardt. I'm the Planning Commission staff liaison to unincorporated Hillsborough County. I've been co-managing the commercial locational criteria study over the last year with Andrea Papandrew, who's sitting here to my right. She's also a planner working on the unincorporated Hillsborough County team with the Planning Commission. With us tonight in person is also Pat Tajewski, who works for SNME. They're our consultant firm who's been working tirelessly on this project for the last year. And virtually with us tonight is Nick Hill with SNME, who has also been working on Pat's team throughout the study. With that, I will turn it over to Pat for the presentation.
Good evening. I want to make sure that everybody hears me okay, but well, we'll get started with the PowerPoint. So we go to the agenda slide.
It should show it in 1 second.
All right, so we're going to, first of all, we're going to talk about why we're here, why we're having this 6th community meeting. We're going to talk about a little bit of the background. We're not going to go into extensive background presentation because we've done that so many times. Then we're going to talk about the community meeting number 5, what comments we heard, and some emails and comments that staff received since then. Then we're going to talk about the changes to the draft between draft 5 and 6. Then we're going to talk about the next steps, and we're going to close with questions and discussion. The next slide. So why are we here? So the idea of this meeting is to talk about all the public input that we received, that matrix that staff mentioned last time that we were putting together. And we're going to go through the changes that we have made to the draft. And then we're going to answer any pending questions and, of course, obtain additional input. It's never too late to get input from the community. So originally, when we started working on this project, like Melissa mentioned almost a year ago, the idea was to revise the updated language. The CLC, as we call it, the commercial locational criteria, has been in the books for many, many years. One of the items that staff wanted us to look at was the fact that they have been getting a lot of waiver requests. Also wanted to reflect the current retail environment, and also making sure that the intensity of these commercial nodes was concentrated at the intersections, and that the intensity would be tapered down as you moved away from the intersection. Now, those were just some of the instructions that we got to begin with. But then we were also asked to review a series of documents that the county has prepared in the past, and some are adopted, to see what other information we needed to keep in mind. Also, we had a lot of interviews and briefings and public meetings, and basically there were a few other items that we needed to address. One of them addressing transportation and access issues. We needed to accommodate pedestrians, cyclists, and transit users, and support the creation of town centers, of nodes of commercial at the intersections. And then, of course, we heard loud and clear from the, especially the rural communities, that we have community plans in place, and they have specific directives that we needed to respect. In terms of the comments that we heard from community meeting number 5 and some of the emails that we have received, there was a lot of frustration with the meeting format, the last meeting that we had. The idea was just to sit down and gather all the comments so that we could sit down and analyze them and figure out, what we're going to do from there on. We heard the frustration, and we hopefully today we have addressed all of them, and we're here to have a conversation. There was a lot of concern with the idea that there should be a commercial needs assessment done to figure out, are we reducing the amount of commercial? Are we providing adequate acreage for commercial? Also, there were some concerns because there was a belief that we were reducing the square footage that was allowed compared to what's adopted to what was in draft number 5. Some people believe that by having these size restrictions that we would be increasing the vehicle miles traveled, that people would have to drive longer distances to meet their services, but meet their needs. There was also some disagreement with the fact that we kept talking about neighborhood commercial for the CLC. It was some people believe that the commercial locational criteria objectives should address more than just neighborhood commercial. There was a lot of discussion about nodes and cores. If we're going to concentrate all the commercial in the nodes, what's going to happen? The next one was a desire to allow office uses. The adopted language allows office uses to be at the nodes, so that's something that we reconsidered. There was discussion related to the fact that some of the commercial uses were being limited, especially those auto-oriented uses. There were some questions about agricultural uses. There was discussion related to, should we treat this differently if you're in the rural area versus the urban service area? Talked about the maximum size per quadrant, maximum size per tenant. We talked about building placement. Does that belong every intersection, or should that be just certain areas? A lot of discussion about the pumps. If we're going to restrict gas stations, what does it mean by a pump? The node separation was also an issue for some people, and the idea of what constitutes strip commercial. Drive-through facilities, we can lump that one in with the limited commercial uses comment. And the building placement and building design, which is something that we're introducing with the new language, that was something that some people were concerned with. The criteria, if you're going to rezone a property to allow commercial waivers, you know, the fact that we have a list, at the time we had a list of 2 waivers that were possible. And then the last one had to do with what happens when you have an existing node, you're trying to expand, how does the nonconformity clause apply and all that. So all those comments, we put them in a matrix. And for each comment, we have an answer. The answer may be we reconsidered, and now we are allowing office uses, or we disagree that this is going to have that effect. So we wanted to have all those questions and answers on a piece of paper or online so that people could have an answer to their comments. Because sometimes from meeting to meeting, the same questions come up, and we wanted to have just one place all of the comments and answers. There was animation. All right, so major revisions. So what did we do between the community meeting number 5 and today? In terms of land uses, so when we came with draft number 5, we were talking about limited neighborhood commercial uses. And we had discussion with staff and have expanded to allow all the uses that are permitted in the commercial neighborhood zoning district today, including the auto-oriented uses, gas stations, restaurants, all that, only if you're located on a suburban commercial roadway. So all those roads that we drive through today and see the gas stations and the commercial, those roads will continue to have those uses, even if they are in a residential land use category. The next one, for office, we brought back office. So now office is allowed in all nodes. And there is a provision that is there today that we brought back by putting a separate objective that says you could even have office outside of these nodes, as long as it is sandwiched between commercial and residential. So that one was brought back, and it's located in objective 23, I believe, so we'll talk about it later.
Can we talk about the office issue instead of waiting half hour and we might lose our thoughts?
Yeah.
Would
you mind speaking up a little bit?
Yes. Thank you very much, by the way. And you did an excellent overview of some of the things we talked about as a team, so thank you. If we could talk a bit about office, as you just mentioned it, I believe the office is redefined, as you said, a little bit more liberally, but I still wonder if policy 22.4, we're grateful that it opened up office locations some instead of severely limiting it to, in some cases, none or only one quadrant per intersection in paragraph 5, which allowed only secondary office use, a word which you've taken out, thank you, off corner except one office corner. I'm wondering, and then another place or two, you mentioned something like move it to edge, or you could do office, not just where it's undevelopable residential, but where it serves as a buffer between retail and residential. So those are all the good news. I'm wondering if we've done enough, though, in order to enable some more flexibility with respect to where office could still be located, because those are some minor improvements and we are grateful for them. But I wonder if we've done enough to give office a chance to survive, some of these strictures. Now, were there one or two other things that might have opened up office a little bit more that you didn't include in sort of this compromise on the subject of where we could and could not put office? I know you like you move it to the edge and you limit its concentration to one quadrant, primarily on corner, that others might be off corner, I believe it said. Are there any other liberalizations of office that might be contemplated?
I mean, right now you can have office at any of these intersections.
But
Whether
it has
it's
to be
just
edge
office.
except corner once. You can corner once, then you have to edge the other 3 quadrants. Is that what you?
No, that was the previous draft. The new draft doesn't have that restriction.
Okay, I thought it did. Maybe I misread it.
We can
Policy.
take a look at,
So we're in 22.4. And 25.4. So I'm thinking not just of 22.4, but also of 25.4. They both deal with office. And if we could look at both, because I think we both have.
well, I mean, 22.4 is basically the commercial locational criteria, which is what we're dealing with right now. All we did with the other 2 provisions was just to take them out so people can find them and they're not really tied to the CLC.
Mm-hmm.
So we just put them outside of the objective. So for 22.4 A2, little item 2, it's like anywhere in your note, you can have that. It doesn't say anything about whether you have it in just one quadrant or 2. It's just at any quadrant. So that would be, I don't know if you have the page numbering like mine, but mine is page 8.
Right, okay. So 25.4 is office development considered within residential feature without meeting the locational criteria. Okay, that's the start. And then proposes a buffer between existing commercial and residential, but then it has the language regarding on parcels that are unsuitable or undevelopable for residential.
Yeah, and that's something that was there before. Like,
Right.
we're not proposing that language.
That's the current policy that we have in the plan today.
No, we're not touching that.
So you're,
I think there was just a real small wordsmithing that you can see in the red line version,
yes,
but the main tenets of this policy remain the same as it is today
okay, thank you.
in the adopted version.
Anything else in office?
And for anyone who's listening online, you'd like to ask a question or speak, please just hit the little, looks like a hand, raise hand function, and we'll call on you to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Okay, so we go to the next one. There were some questions about, how we're going to deal with certain agricultural uses that may not fit in within the square footage. There is a policy in the future land use element that talks about agricultural uses, and those are exempt from the commercial locational criteria. That policy is 30.5. And then for certain areas, we are still including a restriction for gas stations. And what we did was clarify what we mean by so many pumps, dispensers, nozzles. So, when we read the language, it's what we're concerned about is how many cars at one point, not how many nozzles or how many, islands or pumps. It's how many cars at one time. And the idea is to have up to 8 cars at one time. And it's, again, it does not apply to suburban commercial roadways. So it's only for certain areas. In terms of size
Excuse me,
restriction,
Mr. Cat, is it still no drive-throughs?
yes, only in certain areas too. When we get to the table, the big table, we'll take a look at all of them together. We have it in a few slides.
Thank you, excuse me.
In terms of the size restrictions, so we went back and forth with staff and we did some calculations and we looked at the size restrictions actually came from the current draft. We didn't come up with these numbers. What we were doing, we were taking the largest number from all the possible options for each land use category and, making it more flexible. But then with staff, we decided that it was better to just go with the FAR if you are within the urban service area. So this would not apply to the rural area. And also industrial and rural, they would still be limited to a certain amount of commercial. People think that why would we restrict it in industrial if it is already an obnoxious use? Who cares about commercial? Well, the idea is that we want to reserve land for industrial. If all of a sudden somebody comes in, oh, industrial land, it may be cheaper than commercial, or, let's put a shopping center here. We're trying to reserve that land for industrial. So the idea of allowing commercial is just to provide a service for the people who work in that industrial area. So that's the reason why we want to still limit that one. And for rural, again, when people live in the rural area, the last thing they want to see is a shopping center next door, even if it is, within half a mile. We have been asked by people who have attended our meetings that they wanted to restrict it to even less than what we had proposed. We originally started with 40,000 and they asked to please reduce that to 20,000. And again, does not apply to agricultural uses. This would be more for like a convenience store or a personal service or an office type of use. We go to the next one. So this change is going to have to be reflected in the appendix of the future land use element, because we already have that language through some of those land use categories saying commercial is limited to so many square feet. So this is a big change. It's not just for the commercial locational criteria objective, but it has to also be changed in other parts of the element. And the tenant size restrictions, similarly, they will not apply to those sites along the suburban commercial roadways. And again, when we get to the table, we'll see a summary of all this.
Was there a temptation to also take the suburban residential and treat it the same as suburban commercial?
No, the commercial was kind of like the give and take.
Watershed.
It was more like, if we're going to do this, it's going to have to be restricted to certain roadways.
Suburban
and it was
commercial,
just the
not suburban
commercial.
residential.
Size. So in terms of the roadways, so some people are talking about functional classification. We made the change to go from functional classification to contest classification, because even if DOT is doing that, when we talk about functional classification, it's an arterial. An arterial can start in mile 1, go through the rural area, get into the suburban area, going to the urban area, and it's still an arterial. And it may not look different, but we have realized that it may serve as an arterial, but it needs to be designed differently within each one of these transects. And the county created a map to show that some roadways may serve as collectors or arterials, but the character changes depending on what part of the county they are in. So when you look at the countywide map, all the yellow roadways that you see, those are the suburban commercial roadways. The dark orange, the light orange or yellow is the suburban residential. So the orange is suburban commercial. Now this map is available online. So you can go in, zoom in, check certain roadways to see what they're classified as. And so we're no longer referring to the functional classification or to the cost affordable map. That's gone, it's simplified. It's not tied to, the capital improvements, for roadways. If there is a roadway that is not on the map, which, it's probably hard to believe because it seems to include a lot of the roadways on the map. But that would probably take a complaint amendment to add a roadway, to reclassify one. Yes, because the map is adopted in the county.
Absolutely, yes.
So when we talk about node separation, so the whole idea for node separation was to make sure that you have nodes that, because the previous map showed we have a lot of intersections that could potentially qualify for CLC. If we all of a sudden we have every intersection turn into a commercial shopping center, we end up with strip commercial again, and that's the whole idea of not ending up with strip commercial. So we came up with some distances. It's basically 1 mile, 2 miles if you're in the rural area, and we had a lot of questions of how do you measure that? So the idea is if you have your site, look at your south boundary, site boundary, start measuring from your property line, do a drive to the next node, and measure to the closest property line of that node. That is going to be your distance. So it's either 1 mile or 2 miles, depending on where you are. And then it's from your site to an already developed site or an entitled site. Now, if it is entitled and they have been holding for the entitlements for 5 years and they're not doing anything, we created a waiver for that. They can come to the Plan Commission and say, it's been vacant forever. They're not doing anything with it. And we really need a grocery store in this neighborhood. So that's something that they could use to approve that waiver.
Okay. I'm sorry. Come to you or the BOCC or administratively or be reviewed by staff. A trip to the BOCC, if you held entitlements, and you might lose those entitlements unless the BOCC lets you.
No, I
revive
mean,
those
that,
entitlements?
we're not going to change the entitlements. No, we're talking about the new person who's going to create a new node.
I knew.
The new node.
The existing is completely vested. That does not
Yeah.
require going to
We
the
don't
county,
change it.
even to staff, much less the BOCC.
Yeah, and we're not going to take those entitlements away. Even if they approve the waiver, next year they may develop it.
Even unbuilt, and certainly the bills in this, but okay.
Yeah. So. Okay, and then for the next one, so the waivers, I mentioned before that we had 2 waivers available. One was for building placement, the other was for node separation. We're adding a 3rd one to deal with the tenant size limitation, where there may be a certain type of use that is coming in and the 20,000 square foot limitation may not work for them. Then they can, request a waiver.
But it's capped to 15%.
Yes, because, like, when you start thinking, okay, what could be the justification for this? It's not just that, oh, I want to have, Publix and Home Depot and Lowe's. All of a sudden we have 3 big boxes in one node. It's more like maybe you already have a Publix and maybe the next quadrant needs maybe a more affordable grocery store and they need to go a little bit bigger or something like that. It's a situation that is going to have to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. But, there has to be a justification. Waivers are not just that, oh, I just want to, do something different. So they'll need to be justified.
We have an Yvonne Stoker who has her hand raised. Yvonne, if you want to unmute and ask a question. Yvonne?
This is Barbara. I think I signed in under Yvonne's number.
Okay, Barbara, if you have a question or comment, please go ahead.
Sorry about that. So today I'm Yvonne. Yvonne, please excuse me. I know she's on the line. The waiver, is that going to be okay in the rural service area? And so they could do a waiver of 15% over the 20,000?
Yes, it's applicable everywhere.
Yikes. Okay. I don't think I like that.
Up to 15%. And then for site and building design, we had a lot of discussion about this. It has been really hard because this was one of the main reasons why we were doing this whole revamping of the PLC. There has to be some design involved because things can be done, but they have to be designed right. Now, the Planning Commission have their hands tied in the sense that they deal with the comprehensive plan. They're not the keepers of the land development code. So they can't just say, oh, we're going to adopt something in the land development code. But at the same time, they want to provide the guidance within this objective, within the land development, within the comprehensive plan. So we've been trying to draft language that is appropriate for the comprehensive plan, that doesn't get into land development code, And it's going to have to be left more conceptual than code language. That's something that staff is comfortable doing, and they're going to deal with that as applications come in. We have to forget about saying, 20% of your facade is going to have to be this, or you cannot exceed, a blank wall more than 20 feet by 10 feet, or we just can't do that. So the language is going to be general, and that's, something that, if after a year they see that it's going to be a nightmare, enforcing that, they may have to change it. But that was the conclusion that we arrived to. So we simplified that section. And again, a reminder that the building design and placement does not apply along the suburban commercial roadways. So did I have the table? Did I skip the table? Where did it go? Maybe it's a hidden slide. It's a hidden slide. Sorry about that.
From there.
Got it?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so this was the next slide. So you're all familiar with this table. We looked at it last time. If it's animated, so if I click the first animation. So the first thing that we did, originally this was a working table. It was a table that we put together just to get organized in our heads, where are we allowing neighborhoods, where are we allowing community, where are we allowing regional scale commercial? And staff liked the idea of having the table in the report. And we put it in the report and we kept that first column and realized that may be confusing to people and we're not really explaining it in the objectives. So we're getting rid of that column. So for the next highlight, so the title of the third column in draft 5 said commercial zoning in parentheses uses. Well, most of these requests are going to go through PD anyway. So we decided to change that title to just say uses. That's it. That column only tells you what type of uses you can have in a commercial node, depending on which land use category you have. So when you go to the industrial categories and it said CN limited per policy, blah, 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 that means it's the CN uses, commercial neighborhood uses, with certain limitations that you can find in that policy. You scroll all the way down to the NMU4, NMU6, it said CNCG. That means those are the uses that would be allowed within that PD. We added a footnote to that type of commercial uses, zoning uses. There's a footnote number 2. That footnote, once and it highlights it at the bottom, it says that the policy 22481, which is the limitation of neighborhood commercial uses, that's where we restrict the gas stations and the drive-throughs. Those restrictions do not apply to sites located along suburban commercial roadways. So drive-throughs, gas stations, all those uses that we're limiting, that does not apply to suburban commercial roadways.
Okay, but I'm looking at that, and there are not very many suburban commercial roadways. There are things that I would consider suburban commercial roadways that are not designated as such on this map. So,
Okay, how about let's finish going through the table and we can open the map and zoom in and start looking at that.
I mean,
But there may be other things that apply to that too.
they're all, the ones that I would only have, some ones that I would consider to be suburban commercial roads have segments that are suburban commercial, but the rest are suburban residential, and they're major thoroughfares out in Brandon and South County.
That's what I was referring to a while ago.
Yeah, we'll look at the map together.
That's what I meant.
Get the next
That's
highlight.
Brandon.
So the next highlight is that column that says building placement. So it's the same idea. Building placement and design does not apply to suburban commercial roadways. And the last, another highlight. So where we used to have a maximum size per quadrant, we used to have 50,000 for residential 2, 110,000 for residential 4 through 9, 175 from there down So what we're doing now is that for residential 2, for example, it says 50,000. However, use the FAR if you're in the urban service area. So this is encompassing not just those roadways, but the whole urban service area. We're just going to use FAR. The same thing for the residential 4 through 9.
Yeah.
And then from there down, starting with the neighborhood mixed use, is just FAR. And the last clip shows, I guess there was, the last column says maximum gross floor area per tenant. Again, we added a footnote that says if you're in the suburban commercial roadway, that does not apply. So let me just briefly go through the next steps so that just in case people need to leave early, but so just before we get into the
Before you leave that
discussion.
chart, could you please go to draft 6, res 12 through res 35 on the left column? And then it says CN limited per policy 22.4A, the line.
And then at the very top, the header
Uh-huh.
has a footnote number 2. That means it applies to the entire column.
Okay.
Excuse me, Ron, would you mind moving yourself closer to that mic there?
Sure.
Because people online are having a hard time hearing your
I'm
questions.
sorry, thank you.
So I want to make sure we get those.
They were not missing
Thank you.
much. Thank you, thank you. Okay. Okay, so the footnote at the top is a footnote directed at not applicable in the CI and the CM zoning districts, is that correct?
The footnote,
Or you're thinking about footnote 2, which is policy 22.4, building placements and maximum tenant size provisions do not apply to sites located along suburban commercial roadways.
that's right.
But you're not helping us with those many Brandon suburban residential roadways, which are a lot of them in
We'll
pink
have
here that we're going to show you when we get back to that issue for Cami. But my question goes further than that. My question goes to, in 2 or 3 of the previous drafts, the res 12 through the res 35 were allowed CN and CG, and CG is a code word for yes drive-throughs and a lot of other things that are not allowed in what used to be called CN and is now called CN limited. Therefore, if you take out CG, which used to be for res 12 through res 35, which is, I don't know, maybe a fourth of the county, is that about right? Res 12 to res 35, or at least a fourth of the density. I'm sure it's at least, you know, a third or half of the density out there. By its nature, suddenly it's CN limited, which is no drive-throughs and 5 or 6 other no's. Is that unintentional? Because res 12 through res 35, those are the 4 or 5 of the most intense categories, and suddenly there are no drive-throughs because what was in the last 5 drafts, which was CG, which is drive-throughs, now it's CN limited only? Is that intentional?
I don't believe it ever had CG in it, but this change has been, I want to say since draft 2, I have to verify that change was made. So this has been in all of the drafts that you've seen as of late. Yeah, 6/20/21. So that was quite a while ago.
Right, but I think we've said every time that's a problem.
You mean 6/20/22? So this is the draft 4.
That's not draft 5, no.
But CG's never been for res 12 through?
It was, I'd have to check what draft it was, but it definitely was not.
Well, in the last.
This was not a change that we have made between draft 5.
For this one, I believe that CG was synonymous with drive-through and 4 or 5 other things like it, auto-centric, and they were in the res 12 through res 35, which are among the most intense categories in the whole county.
Right, it makes.
That's
no-
our question.
It makes no sense that you would have NMU4 and NMU6 and allow CG uses, but not allow it in the other residential category.
It was res 35, which is the county's biggie.
But the NMU6 and the NMU4 include a range of uses that are not included in residential plan categories. I think that's the point that we're trying to make here, is that the neighborhood serving component is what we're talking about in residential plan categories. So that would not be the same in the NMU, which is neighborhood mixed use, and the suburban mixed use.
So you really don't think in Res 35 there should be any drive-throughs?
No,
Yes.
because we're working on neighborhood serving uses here, and those are auto-centric uses that are really designed to serve more of a community base or a regional base and not a neighborhood.
Really?
And that's been part of the conversation since.
Right, and that's
That has
something,
not changed as from draft 4 to, I'm sorry, 5 to 6.
I would say, I think that continues to be something that we have a fundamental difference on, and we're just never gonna, I mean, I'm not gonna be able to support that.
Fair enough.
We do have a question from Anthony Malone online. Anthony, I'm gonna unmute you if you want to ask your question.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I understand what the problem is if it's neighborhood commercial. I wouldn't want a drive-through next to my house. I mean,
The residential 35 land use category is one of the most intense residential land use categories that are present in the comprehensive plan.
all right, so I'm still not understanding them.
The question is, do I have to, if I live in Brandon, do I have to drive to Tampa to go to McDonald's? If I want
I
to,
think that's kind of, I don't think that's the case. I mean, really?
Or you could walk downstairs to,
I mean, if it doesn't sound like, I mean, this is 1, 2, 3, 4 residential res categories, so,
is for
and it's
the
neighborhood
residential categories.
commercial. I'm still not understanding what the problem is.
The other thing that I would point out is that, like I said, we're talking about residential plan categories, but there are other more intensive categories that you can see on that table that would allow for consideration of the full range of the CN and CG uses. So you mentioned Brandon, I mean, State Road 60 has OC 20, office commercial 20 in a lot of the spots where commercial locational criteria wouldn't apply, just like it doesn't today.
Well, right, but that's kind of the point, is that it has been allowed, it's not been a problem. And I don't know why all of a sudden now, if something new were to come along, it would now be a problem to have that kind of, that area.
Because I'll give you a good example. Anytime you have single-family residential abutting any, or any kind of a residential land use category up against a drive-through, yeah, it's an issue. I mean, when I was working in Alabama, it was constantly an issue, and we made the mistake of doing that, and it really aggravated our really established neighborhoods. So,
And
yeah,
for,
it is.
for informational purposes, the city of Tampa has major corridors, Florida and Nebraska, which have CMU 35 land
I'm
use.
talking about Gandy, for instance. There
Well,
was
no,
a car wash that went in.
Hear
I
me
wouldn't
out.
want a car wash right behind my house. I mean, I
All
think
of
if there's
properties
It's
in
reasonable, it seems reasonable to me for these categories, but that's just my,
Yeah, Anthony, all of those, what my point is that all of those abut single-family residential neighborhoods.
yeah, that's an issue. I mean, it's a horrible, I mean, who wants to hear the squawking of a McDonald's, of a fast food drive-through from your back window out of your kitchen? I mean, come on, I don't. That's the whole point of land use control in the first place, is protecting neighborhoods. I mean, I don't think this is out of the ordinary or strange. Just saying.
We can agree to disagree to that.
Yep.
Thank you, Kath.
you want to do the steps?
Yeah.
So just so that people know what's coming later, we have been scheduling briefings with the planning commissioners or board of county commissioners as requested. And we're going to be doing that between November and December. And we're hoping to go to the planning commission for a hearing in December. That would be December 12th. And the transmittal hearing would be with the board of county commissioners in January. And for those who have not found it yet, there is a draft available online on Planning Commission's website. That's the address. And that's also where you can find the matrix with the answers that we have provided. And I think we can, maybe open the map and take a look at, the different road side pieces there.
I can, but we have a Joe Morena who has a question first, so I'm looking at that. Joe, you are unmuted if you'd like to ask the question.
Joe, if you're speaking, we cannot hear you.
His microphone is unmuted, so I'm not sure.
Okay, well, if it's easier to type it in either the chat or the question section, you can go ahead and do that.
Anybody understand what's online? I changed.
We're opening the,
If anything good happened with the channel.
the interactive map showing the contract specification and future venues.
Copy channel or whatever.
Just believe I can spend time
Me too.
because they're all the time.
Expanded parking lot. Leon.
Are there any specific roads that we can zoom in to see what
I mean,
the
you could just-
situation is?
I mean, you don't even have to zoom into a road as much as just looking at what's, I don't know that that map's going to be the best map to look at it on. It's easier to look at it just as a standalone map. You don't have all the confusing colors.
But I mean, the colors are the land use categories.
No, I'm talking about the colors of the roadways, the classifications of the roadways. So only the pink have the waiver. Only where it's pink.
You mean not the waiver, but this don't have the requirement.
Right, don't have, right, exactly, that don't have the restriction. Yeah.
So just looking at the map, just myself right now, there's a decent amount of Falkenberg, portions of Causeway, 78th, Bloomingdale.
It's only a part of Bloomingdale. There's like 2 segments of Bloomingdale and like there's OC 20 and multifamily and all kinds of things coming along that roadway. The parts there are, so there are only certain parts of Bloomingdale that are designated that way.
Right, I would just add for,
I shouldn't even say parts. It's actually, it's interesting where it's
Good to see you.
designated
Big years.
as suburban commercial, it's actually as it transitions back into lower density residential.
and can we just, people at home, I can't hear you, so just make
Okay.
sure you speak up when you talk, because we do have people joining us
Sure.
remotely. Yeah, I mean, we can debate the merits of the context classification back
Right.
all day, but.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's
it's
not
definitely
changing.
well vetted, it's adopted as part of the mobility section, so.
That's not the question. The question is, what, how does this, where is it?
So that was something that we added, that was
Right.
not something that was in there from the beginning. And just based on what the description of the suburban commercial context is like, that, we felt that that was the most appropriate if you're going to have a place where you're not going to have those limits for the building placement and the other design features, that the suburban commercial would fit that better than the others. I mean, I understand that, that's not everywhere and that there's more suburban residential than suburban commercial from a numbers perspective.
Well, I mean, I guess,
Point taken.
yeah, I mean, I guess again, my only point is that we're applying a regulation kind of essentially retroactively that doesn't really reflect the existing character of what these roadways actually look like. I mean, again, taking the context classification out of it, that's a whole separate thing. But in terms of what types of uses are located there now on other parts of the developed land along
Yeah.
Bloomingdale Avenue, along, some of these more suburban categories where they have existing commercial and they have OC20, or they have something else, and that's what's all around them. And now we're saying you're not allowed there anymore, or you're limited in your size now.
And the word retroactive, thank you, Cammie. The word retroactive also reminds us that for 35 years, when a staff would come along and choose suburban residential in the charrettes that determined where is the suburban residential, they were not destroying neighborhoods proximity to commercial, because the allowance of the last 35 years that we're undoing tonight at this adoption, meaning that when you put suburban residential somewhere, you are not doing that neighborhood to 5 or 10 miles to commercial, and you are giving them as a right the amounts of retail that we're taking away in these proceedings, is where Cammie and I are coming from, and why the suburban residential is not independently put there, knowing what we adopt and not assume pursuant to this, such that the next location of suburban residential and its consequences to those neighborhoods being 5 or 8 miles from commercial in some cases, instead of putting them as suburban commercial, to save them on this subject of proximity to commercial. Going forward, that category will have some consequences. Heretofore, that category did not have this consequence when suburban residential was put, as you remind us, and as Cammie and I were concerned, in a lot of Brandon and other places which were not designated suburban commercial because the rules of the road were different for 35 years.
Yeah, I don't know, what to say, because when you start opening it, and I know that it has been not allowed because it was not by right, but it has been permitted for people to come in and apply for it, doesn't mean that it was creating something appropriate. It doesn't mean that it was creating what the county wants to see for the next, 20 or more years.
Then there be no harm in allowing it tonight.
So
For our
the
request.
idea is that, those people need some services, let's bring it to them. But all of a sudden, if you're in a very suburban, low intensity area, are we encroaching into their neighborhoods with something that is not appropriate for that area? And I think when they looked at these borders and the classification, I don't think it's going to be static. When they do the next update of the comprehensive plan, they may expand it to change the character of some of these roadways. But for now, they have made the decision that that's where they want to see the activity. That's where they want to see those types of uses. And for the suburban residential roadways, they want to just,
They being the county commission,
the planning commission.
they being the planning commission. For 35 years, the planning commission has the benefit of commercial being proximate locationally in suburban residential. And you're giving mercy to suburban commercial. Thank you that the suburban residential for 35 years has had access to enough commercial uses to serve the needs to prevent these long drives. But we'll move on. I think we've met our point.
So Anthony has his hand up again. I don't know if this is from the previous comment or question, Anthony, but if you have a new comment, go ahead and I'll unmute you.
Tony, how are you?
I think it might be raised from before.
Joe Moretta also has his hand up.
That was from before as well, I think.
I don't know if that was before or not, but can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
now we can.
Hey, excellent. Now I have to remember what I was going to say. I had a question. It looks like this is going forward in January of 23, and it looks like probably the implementation tool is probably going to be plan development, correct?
Yes.
And the only thing I was processing when I was looking through the chart is that if you specifically list the uses that are in the zoning districts, and these are PDs, and the PDs can potentially come up with conditions that can ameliorate something in one of those uses that would potentially to do away with the impact. It looks like it's maybe hemming it in a little bit. I don't know. Just kind of thinking out loud, but I know now that we have the ability to, we had the ability to deal with those with conditions. So if you have some type of a use that may have literally put it in another category, but when you come through a PD, you have the ability to exercise conditions that would ameliorate those impacts, then you could consider the use on its merit and how it would relate to the rest of the area in that particular fact set, as opposed to just literally whether it was in a certain use category as defined by the code. And I was just only noting that because it looks like it may be a little bit of a limiter in situations where there can be things offered up that would potentially make use, different than what the on-the-shelf brand of the code would be.
Joe, this is Tammy. I think your read of that is correct, that these drafts and this draft included and prior drafts really don't allow you to ask for the waiver as we could it now under the existing code. So it is more limiting. And it takes away the ability to look at things on a case-by-case basis. I mean, you can still ask, you're just going to get a planning commission recommendation for denial.
I also wanted to, there were some questions online that I wanted to make sure we recognized as part of this recording.
Thank you. I'll put my hand down, but thank you. Sorry, I caused a little bit of a glitch there with my audio.
Thanks, Joe. Someone had asked, where can I go online to learn more about the project? I did post the link to the project study webpage. There you can see the link to the notes from each of the community meetings. You can see the PowerPoints from the community meetings and all the various drafts. Anthony Balone made a comment about the context classification, speaking to the future conditions, and that it's a bridge between transportation and land use. And then Catherine Coyle made a note a couple minutes ago when we were talking about the residential plan categories, that as a clarification on the previous point, which I just mentioned, R35 in the city of Tampa allows consideration of CN and RO uses under a site plan rezoning, which is a PD, under locational criteria, not CG or CI uses. Thus, in the city of Tampa, a drive-through would not be allowed without a comp plan amendment. So she added that. I think that is the rest of those are the rest of the questions. Don't see any other ones.
And just to clarify, I wasn't talking about Res 35, I was talking about CMU 35 next to R10. The point being, you have very intense commercial activity along Florida and Nebraska, and you have single-family residential directly abutting it.
Yeah, we have a lot of mixed-use categories, and we added one more to address that. And I understand that we have a different way of approving land use map amendments here.
5 votes.
Yeah, but the options are there. And those mixed use land use categories don't necessarily require the mix of uses if you're within a certain size.
Right. And I just had a question, just kind of going back to the chart, question about the RP2. Did the RP2 version that got adopted include commercial locational? Like what happened to, because it used to be in the northern RP2, the north of the scrub, you didn't have to meet commercial locational criteria. That was a specific policy that was added in at the request of
The pink versus the
county.
yellow.
And I didn't know if that survived because I know I didn't follow exactly what happened with the RP2. So I was just wondering if the RP2 that was adopted contemplated commercial locational criteria, and that's just a cleanup to add in here.
It's a cleanup to add in here. And also we're still working with, I guess you would say, some people would say the old language, but what's adopted today, because the new language, though adopted, is not effective because of the legal challenges.
Oh, I know it's still going on.
Yes, it is.
Never mind.
Any other questions, comments? The matrix that was posted online has a bunch of documents at the very end. Like it includes a list of the uses that are permitted in CN versus CG, and highlights those that are being changed by the CLC. We also included a list of typical sizes, average sizes for different types of commercial establishments. And do you remember what, something else that we included there?
While you're thinking of that, did I see an addition between draft 5 and 6 that in front of a building to the street, while parking was prohibited in several paragraphs, you've added also no circulation? You can't move even a vehicle around the front of the building?
Yeah.
Is that, so we're going the wrong way respecting the subject to?
Yeah, the idea is to put the building close to the street. So if you start putting driveways, you know, it defeats the purpose of connecting that building to the pedestrian environment. So if the building placement applies to you, then it means no vehicular use in front of the building or between the building and the street.
Did you consider our security and other points with respect to allowing parking in the front, at least some?
I mean, we see it everywhere. It's, you know, the safety excuse, I don't think it's, you know, it's applicable when we're trying to create a pedestrian environment. Somebody talked about, okay, now we're going to get the dumpster and the deliveries in the back. Well, that's where they are today. They put them even closer because the building is in the back. So, you know, anywhere that you look, any community that has been growing, the idea is to bring back the space for the pedestrians, the bicyclists. We have to stop planning for the automobile. And I know that, you know, it may be idealistic or, you know, some people don't see it as, you know, real world, but it can be done. It can be done.
If it takes 15 or 25 or 30 years to create a critical mass of walking communities, why would you wait 15 or 25 or 40 years to have a sufficient critical mass of such walkable communities in rural
We don't
Westbrook
start
County?
somewhere, how we're going to get there.
I mean, how
Within
do
5 or
we,
15 years of earned in those neighborhoods.
I mean, how does building the building up to the street in and of itself create a walkable environment? I know it can be, like, I know through form-based codes and things that it can be done, and you have a public realm and you have buildable area and all of that, but just like say on Bloomingdale Avenue, if I orient my building to the front, how does that create Bloomingdale? How does that?
Number one, when you start bringing the buildings one by one closer to the street, that's going to slow down the traffic because you're creating, and this is in the FDOT manual, you create that wall on both sides of the street, it slows down traffic.
Right, but there's like a 6-lane highway in places, right? I mean,
No, in any street, I mean, there are certain dimensions that you can look at that, you know, will eventually get to that point where you're creating a space between, you know, the buildings and that you're enclosing the space. When you have the buildings way in the back, and I have experienced it before where, you know, I was trying to be a good pedestrian in Pittsburgh, took a bus and went to a restaurant. When I got off the bus, I had to pretend I was a car, go up the driveway, go through the parking lot to get to the entrance to the restaurant that was way in the back. You know, that's not pedestrian friendly. When you have to go through the drive-through lanes to get to the door of the McDonald's, that's not pedestrian friendly. So, you know, I think maybe Joe was talking about how some uses can be designed to achieve the same purpose. And we have seen it. Some T&D communities have the drive-throughs that are inside the building. You know, it could be done, but at the same time, okay, so we're encouraging more people to just take their cars and go places.
I just don't think that I decide to buy a car because I'm going to go to the grocery store or go to the convenience store or the drive-through. I mean, I have the car, right? And so if I have the car and I'm going to go to a drive-through, I'm going to go to one somewhere, right?
But when people start having some of these uses closer to their homes, the mentality of having to get in the car to go get milk, have to get in the car to go get some food, going to start walking and biking. And I know some people believe that that's never going to happen, but it's happening in other places. It can happen. But if we don't start with the design, I don't know when we're going to get there.
We have a raised hand from Yvonne, I don't know if it's Yvonne or Barbara. But you should be unmuted now.
This is the real Yvonne Stoker. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to thank all of you working on this redesign, because I grew up in Tampa in the rural areas off of Nebraska Avenue in the areas that were just recently discussed. And back then, yeah, things got developed and there was no really oversight on what was put on Nebraska Avenue in the residential areas. So I agree that it's maybe 20 years, 30 years too late to do some of this planning, but if you don't start now, then we'll never improve the quality of life in those rural areas where those kind of commercial activities were unrestricted in the past. And I just want to thank the staff and the consultants for working on that. I'm not a planner, so I don't really understand a whole lot of what was discussed today, but I have a sense that it's going in the right direction. So I'm in the Keystone area, which is a very rural agricultural, farming, and residential area. And that can't really be compared to, say, the Waimama area or some of the other areas that are growing rapidly. So one of my comments is in the unincorporated areas of Hillsborough County, one size is not going to fit all. And if it's possible to tweak that a little bit so that you're doing things that are more appropriate for Keystone versus Brandon versus Waimama and so forth, maybe that will help, because it is hard to put that same blanket over all those unincorporated areas. But overall, I like what I'm hearing and I appreciate all your efforts. Thank you.
Was the definition of strip commercial more limiting or less limiting? It's a prohibition of strip commercial, and then it's the last definition on the last page of the entire draft. And the new definition says low density, multi-access, auto-oriented single or multiple uses, not functionally related, requiring inefficient facilities and services extension and failing to provide a clear separation between urban and rural uses. Is that less clear than the old one, which was, quote, prohibited strip commercial is auto-prominent parking visible from roadway, multiple access, typically outside intersection quadrants, which means that the intersection quadrants were not as subject to these limitations in draft 5. So draft 6 is worse in that it removed that typically outside intersection quadrants. So haven't you defined strip commercial in an even more concerning way than when we were concerned about the definition of strip commercial the last time we talked?
So after we heard that comment, we went and we looked at different definitions in different places. And when you go to the comments matrix, the very last page shows all the definitions that we found. And the one that we decided to use comes from the Florida state statutes. And word for word, that's what it says, except that we added a statement, the multiple driveways. Everything else comes from the state statutes.
But you did have multiple driveways.
And yeah, that part was not there. Now, this definition is not just applicable to the CLC. There are a lot of other references in the comp plan to strip commercial. So we don't want to make it so unique to the CLC that it stops applying everywhere else.
We'll look back at it. Thank you for giving some additional sourcing.
And the other item that we have in the matrix document is a table that compares the square footages that we allow today compared to the square footages that we're proposing with this draft. So somewhere in the back of that matrix, people can find that. So some people were saying, how do I compare? I want to see like the apples to apples. How do I know if we're increasing or decreasing the acreages? So that table is in the back.
And finally, the multifamily definition was changed, and you said you allow multifamily anywhere in draft 5, but in draft 6, you allow it only in vertical mixed use, not in all mixed use?
I mean, when you have a node, you're going to use the node for commercial. And the idea is to create that vertical integration. I think that came from the previous, let me just confirm that because I believe it was in the.
Yeah, our red line says that's new, and the vertical's underlined in 6 versus 5.
Yeah.
So that means that we're limiting multifamily even more in this draft? Is that how you read it? Redlining verticals that added in 6 was not in 5. So multifamily is only allowed in vertical, not horizontal mixed use. If you could look at that, please, see if that also was intentional. You could give some reasons why. And thank you for your patience tonight. Anything else, Cami, for that?
Yeah, I guess because I thought it came from somewhere else originally. I don't know how to check.
And we really would appreciate you looking back at that CG and those prior drafts and the reason that CG is so important. And also drive-throughs, we discussed what are known as Boca Raton drive-throughs. Are all three of you familiar with what are known as Boca Raton drive-throughs? You are, Kat. Are you, Andrew, familiar with Boca Raton drive-throughs? Never been to Boca Raton? No. Melissa, are you familiar with the difference in Boca Raton drive-throughs and most of the rest of the state? Okay, when you drive in, Kath, you want to describe the difference in a Boca Raton drive-through, how they allow them in order to let people Boca Raton not be denied all the brands they need. It has extra architectural finish, some obscuring of the drive-through, so it's angled, for example, so that when you get to it, it's like, is that a drive-through? And then you look closely enough and it is. And then there's limited smaller signage that says it is with the brand name, and thereby creates less intrusion, less noise, light, etc., because of the way the drive-through is embedded into the Boca Raton architecture. Not to prohibit them, because that's something that in some of these cases, some of these brands no longer have a non-drive-through. The ones that might come to these food deserts in rural Hillsborough County and some of suburban Hillsborough County, they don't even have a non-drive-through brand. So these drive-throughs are life and death in ways that go beyond the academics and the idealism of hoping that, we never have any more drive-throughs. But if you could just look at the Boca Raton drive-throughs, they have the same problem, but rather than prohibiting all the brands that were the only brands that could serve the needs of Boca Raton citizens, they went ahead and adapted some architecture and some screening.
And we have written standards for drive-throughs in the past, and I live in Orlando, and we have a bunch on Orange Avenue that the restaurant is up to the street. They have outdoor dining, and you would never guess that there is a drive-through in the back, but it's completely in the back. You don't see it from the front. The entrance is not from the front. The window is not visible from the street. So there are ways of doing it. So that takes care of the visual part, but it doesn't take care of the traffic of people going in and out, and cars going in and out.
Well, I think that's one of the things that we brought up before is when you're forcing the buildings to the street, you're forcing the back of the house to the neighborhood.
Not necessarily. I mean, it's
in some areas, just as a practical matter, in some locations in Hillsborough County where you might think it commercial would be appropriate, that is the practical effect just of the geog. There will be instances, not all instances, but there are some instances where the neighborhood would prefer the back of the house, the service areas to be
I
away
lived in an apartment complex that was next to a Goodings, when we used to have Goodings. And a couple of times a week, I could hear the garbage being, thrown in the truck. And it was very noisy. Why? Because the building was way in the back. And the trash was between the building and my apartment. Whereas if you have the building out to the street, like it is in the Winthrop area, the dumpsters are way there by the building. The building is far from the apartments.
Well, right. Winthrop was specifically designed.
That's
Winthrop's a good example because it was done through a PD and didn't have to worry about commercial location criteria. They could design the site and everybody could agree what was appropriate.
If somebody comes in with a design that shows the building in the front, beautiful building, and they put the dumpster next to the homes, guess what? Staff is going to say, no, we're not going to put the dumpster right next to the homes.
Right.
So that's part of the idea of compatibility.
I have a separate question, and it's really more probably for Melissa L. Like, how does something like an outdoor recreational, private outdoor recreational activity fit within all of this?
I think it depends on the specifics of what the use are. If it's something that code would classify as a full CN or CG use, then,
I mean, it doesn't really classify it as either.
yeah, I think we would have to look into the specifics of what exactly the recreational use is.
Because that's
Because that's kind of a wide ranging.
that's one of my
Descriptor.
concerns about kind of what we're doing here. I mean, I know what we're focusing on here, and we've got the major categories, office, commercial, whatever, but there's those random ones that have been subject to commercial locational criteria before that don't seem to squarely fit anywhere in here.
Good point.
Yeah, I think that would probably be a discussion when it's submitted. It's really difficult to cover, every single use in these tables. Yeah, I think that we'd have to see exactly what kind of, transactions take place, what kind of activities associated with it, what kind of operating hours they are, and see kind of, does it squarely fit into one place or another?
Because to me, I don't really think of that type of use as something that would be part of a commercial locational criteria,
Right.
kind of for the reasons that you're laying out here. You've got certain nodes, you're doing the neighborhood serving commercial, you're doing, and so to me, I wouldn't think that a recreational facility that commercial location criteria would apply if the commercial location criteria are changed in this way. And that's just some food for thought in terms of they don't have the same types of, they're commercial, right? But they're not retail, they're not office, they're commercial in nature, maybe because they're open to the public, a paying public,
Right.
but are they really truly
And there's a good
commercial?
service exchange. But
Right.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think that's usually where that comes in.
and so, and like in the one that we worked on, right, there was a commercial aspect of it, right? There was a food service aspect to the use, but that really wasn't the primary use. That people primarily coming there aren't coming there to go to dinner there. They're coming there to use the pool, right?
Right.
So, I mean, it's just something, and there may be other things out there like that that are similar, that don't fall squarely here, but where commercial locational criteria have been applied before, that we might just think about how that would apply.
Good point. Did Andrew ever get unmuted? Did Andrew have anything else? I thought you tried to.
Anthony?
Anthony, did Anthony ever get through?
No,
No.
I think there were some additional questions.
Yes, which ones, they don't put them in order, so it gets a little confusing of which ones you answered or not. Miss Jamie Sager said that she did not agree with the waiver in Keystone Odessa either. I'm wondering if she meant that she didn't think it should apply there. I think that's what she meant, maybe.
I think that's what
Maybe
they're saying.
Jamie, if you're still on there, you might want to clarify
She
that.
just raised her hand, so.
Okay.
Jamie, if you'd like to clarify, go ahead.
Hi, correct. I did not think it applies to
Okay.
Keystone Odessa.
Okay, thank you.
There's one back.
Okay, and then lastly, or the last comment that we hadn't read yet, by Catherine Coyle, she said a more cogent argument for including some and not all auto-oriented uses in the Res 35 plan category under the CM limited policy would be that it may reduce some measure of trips on those overloaded arterials, as those residents in the Res 35 would always need to drive out to those major roads, thus adding those related trips on every connecting segment leading to the arterials. A certain number of those residents in those adjacent neighborhoods would drive to nearby and adjacent auto-oriented uses, so those uses would not just capture passerby traffic. We also need to think in context of the actual neighborhood, as not all areas have developed over time in the same way, even though they may have the same flue sitting on top of them. Distance is also something very important to consider, as not all neighborhoods in the whole of the county are or will be walkable due to physical constraints, geography, etc. So thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Is there any other one in this?
That's all I'm seeing. And there's one last comment from Jamie Sager. We have a serious lack of outdoor sports, lacrosse in particular fields, to practice on in Hillsborough County for the number of athletes trying to improve outside of school sports. Thank you, Jamie, for your comments. And then Joe Moretta has his hand up again.
The last, I don't know if it's a comment or question, maybe more of a question, but there was, in catching up to this, there's node separation, correct? And so in looking at the matrix that's up on the screen, would that be, I heard there was like a mile separation between node in one of the conversations earlier. I don't know which category that would apply to, but I'm looking at the screen here. And the only reason I'm asking the question is that if there's a significant distance that's imposed, between nodes, and it just seems like that would discourage the walking. Was there like a ped shed or something that was considered, in terms of separating the nodes?
The tape, I don't know if you have a copy of the draft, but it's
I'm
table.
catching up. I'm just getting up to speed on some of this, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
There is a table 2 on page 5. If you look at the track changes document. And it says basically that the separation between nodes in some roads is going to be 2 miles. And that's if you're basically rural areas intersecting with, other types of roadways. That's 2 miles. And then 1 mile for all other intersections. If you're at intersection of suburban commercial, suburban town, and urban general, with those same types of roads, there's no separation.
Okay.
The 1 mile, yeah, it was basically considering that, if you're right in the middle, have one node to the left, one node to the right, it would be approximately half a mile. It's a little more than the quarter-mile safe walking or comfortable walking distance, but it's still doable. So that's, how we came up with the 1 mile.
The only thing I would say to that is that, the additional distance might encourage people to drive. It seems that if you're looking for, walkability, that you may want to reduce that number as opposed to, maintain that degree of separation. I mean, I know that like the magic number is like what, a quarter mile, 1320. Just an observation, and obviously the way the subdivision is designed has a lot to do with it too. And everybody may not be right up to the street, so it may be a little bit more than what the node separation itself is. So if walkability is the driver, then it seems like you may want to give some consideration to maybe reducing that to maybe provide the commercial closer to the people that are going to be walking to it.
Yeah, and we went back and forth with that. And, the other factor that we have to consider is if you start spacing them closer together, half a mile, are we going to end up with commercial corridors?
Right.
Instead of commercial nodes. And yes, the design is something else that we considered, and we can't do anything about the existing subdivisions that already have their layout, but for future subdivisions, the idea is to create those pedestrian connections in a manner that they're going to be able to reach those nodes easier.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, has there been any analysis of the existing commercial corridors? I mean, it seems to me that there might be some places where you're never going to achieve this because of what's already there. Like either with existing OC20 or existing land uses. Again, Bloomingdale Avenue comes to mind as one of those areas. And it's like, well, how are you even going to ever apply the node standard here?
What do you mean, how would we apply it?
Well, I
Because
mean,
it recognizes the existing and
right,
the entitled.
right, it's recognizing the existing and entitled, so is it even possible to achieve it along Bloomingdale, and therefore does it even? I guess it doesn't matter.
I mean, I think in some corridors, we recognize that there are, like Pat said, I mean, there are nodes that have sort of bled together and become connected over the years, especially the way that the language is written now, when you can really waive any quality about the existing adopted CLC language, except for the square footage that's permitted. But I think, you know, Pat had a point when you're at one intersection, another intersection, and if you're talking about 1,900 feet or 1,000 feet, and you start combining them, then you're only left with a very small piece for, you know, maybe more office infill uses or residential support uses or those types of things that wouldn't necessarily always locate at a node.
Right, but we might not be a perfect grid, and we might be where the next node is 800 feet away, but then there's not another street appropriate, right? Where that might be okay to establish an 850-foot node because that's where the appropriate streets are to have that, and then you don't have anything but local streets for a while until you hit another, because we still have the context classification, right? I mean, we're still paying attention to what roads we're putting commercial on, right?
Right, but then we have the waiver available for nodal separation, which I think something like that, you know, you could make a compelling argument for, like the example that Pat gave before, you know, we're in a food desert, we don't have a grocery store, like this would be a perfect intersection, those types of things. I mean, that's why we have that as a waiver. You know, we felt that it made sense and that could really address some site-specific issues.
Are there any exceptions to the fact that you're stuck at numbers of entitled pieces, someone else entitled, and maybe banking it for 5 or 10 years and not going to build it, but you can't build in that quadrant because of the cap? Is there some exception that you need to draft in there regarding some of the existing that bumps you from building up to the 20,000 square feet per quadrant or whatever? Existing use of two-edged sword. We dealt with one side of the sword a while ago, which has to do with vesting existing. You know, you can build according to the old rules instead of the new. But what about those who are preempting you by existing that's either being land banked or probably not going to be developed for 5 or 10 or 15 years, or it has impediments to its construction by lack of access or whatever? Do you see where I'm going with that, Melissa or Andrea or
That's
Karen?
happening today. I mean, today you have caps. I mean, we're opening it up to larger, you know, allowances and even exceptions. So it's not like we're just now establishing caps per quadrant. That has been in books for many years.
But usually 175,000s and 350,000s and 650,000.
And we're still, unless if you're in a 2-lane by 2-lane road, you don't get the 175,000 square feet. Some of these categories allow even less than that. Now we're bumping it up to 175. So I mean, the idea that we're limiting the size is not 100% correct. We're expanding the size for many situations. Like that table that I talked about in the matrix, and if you can open that one and do it.
Yeah.
It, there is a page that shows the restrictions today versus the limitations for proposed.
I saw that in draft 4. It's redlined. In draft
No,
4.
I mean, there is an easier table to look at.
Yeah, I did see one change. I did.
And, you know, like, for example, if you're in residential 9 and residential 2, in some areas you can do 5,000 square feet. In residential 1, same thing, 5,000 square feet in certain areas. We're opening that up to, you know, larger sizes. Same thing with the distance, like the distance for the Res 4, Res 6, we're going from 900 to 1,000. So there's a lot more flexibility in a lot of these.
Yeah, although I would say, I don't know from at least a layout perspective, how, I mean, we're not really looking for expansions in the rural service area. I mean, speaking of protection of neighborhoods, I mean, we're going to defer to the Keystone folks and those type for what they want in there. I don't know that there's a screaming demand because you can't get water and sewer outside the urban service boundary. So there's not a great demand for retail or any kind of, you know, commercial serving uses outside in those areas. So to us, that expansion is not particularly valuable. We're more concerned about the reductions in the urban service boundary in some of the areas where commercial is allowed now. So, and that's our, and certainly NAP's focus, and then my focus is inside the urban service boundary in the areas, particularly in the areas of higher density. Again, in areas that are developed out now.
Any other questions online?
Not seeing it.
Any questions for us? Thank you for your patience.
Just make sure you sign in.
I will. Thank you.
If anybody else has any questions online, please raise your hand or place them in the chat. Nope, not seeing any.
And, you know, when you guys go through the matrix with the comments and the questions, you know, if any comments or questions come up, please contact Andrea or Melissa. Clarification.
Well, if no one has anything else, we can end a little bit early. Give everyone one more chance. Any more questions? You can type in the chat, raise your hand.
No, yeah,
I can put mine in the chat as well.
Yeah, and I would echo Ron's concern about only having vertical mixed-use developments, because there's some mixed-use developments that might include commercial that are not, they're horizontal, they're not
Absolutely.
vertical.
Absolutely. When I saw that,
Especially in the lower density land use categories.
I mean, the idea of allowing residential is to encourage the provision of affordable housing. You know, it makes those homes more affordable. But at the same time, if somebody comes in and they put a tiny convenience store and they do a whole multifamily complex there, what is the benefit for the residents around it? The single family homes, the people who bought there because they thought they had a single family home neighbor.
So we would be talking about a mixed-use development, a self-contained mixed-use development. And you can have we're talking about multifamily residential, right? Multifamily uses. We recently got approved a multifamily development that had duplexes and single-family housing structures. So there wouldn't have been any way to vertically integrate whatever commercial that we were going to put on site.
So the whole idea of the commercial locational criteria is to bring the commercial closer to the residents. Why would we want to open it up to bring multifamily unless it serves a purpose of, you know?
Well, because it's in residential land use category. I mean,
But it's
that
a
the
res
whole,
4, for example.
right? I mean, as a practical matter, I don't think in Res 4 you're going to get a mixed use development of any kind, whether it be vertical, horizontal, or otherwise. So it would have to be in the probably higher density categories. In those you might get, if you had a larger piece of property, you might have a different mix of
So let's
uses.
take a look at that.
I mean, I don't, and again, as a practical matter, I think if somebody's in a higher land use category, it's probably going to be a multifamily building, and where mixed use is going to be probably retail on the
And
bottom
it's like,
floor.
what benefit would they have to rezone the property if they get the multifamily anyway? If it is res 12, res
Because they
35.
might want the mixed use.
Yeah, but I mean, what I'm saying is, why go through the effort of getting a rezoning of that piece of the property where they're gonna have.
Because there's a ton of ASC1 property in Hillsborough County, so you don't have a choice.
Say that again?
There's a lot of ASC1, AS1, a lot of agriculturally zoned properties in these residential land use categories. So it's not like their zoning is already matched up with their land use categories. So that's what's in my mind, is you're gonna have a big piece of property that needs rezoned anyhow.
I see.
But I would agree, if you had conventional residential zoning, you would do it.
All right, we have no new comments or questions, so thank you all very much for coming this evening. Please reach out if you have any future comments or questions. Andrea and I put our emails in the chat. So with that, everyone have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Okay. so
Is it cold out when you go outside, Ron?
is that great?
Is it gonna be cold
Priya,
out when you go outside?
whenever you're ready to end.
All right. There's 3 of Stamkos' scores, I hope. See YouTube tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you for your patience. Good to see you. Thank you.
Nice meeting you in person.
Thank you. Let's take care of yourself. Bye-bye. Yes, returns.
You can never be too careful, Ron.
Very smart.